Now I'd like to transition to our first panel. And the focus for the panel is existing building decarbonization and the intersection of building energy modeling. So as we all know, much of the discussions in previous CalBEMs have focused on new construction, and that's great, and we'll continue to talk about that. But we really did want to kick off CalBEM with a panel on existing buildings, because as we all know, if we're going to scale up decarbonization, we do need to address existing buildings. So we have three great speakers to talk about different aspects of existing buildings and how they connect with BEM. In terms of the format, we're going to have each of our panelists give a short presentation, and then we'll aim to have hopefully 15 to 20 minutes of Q&A afterwards. So if you're attending remote, please feel free to put your questions in the chat. We'll do our best to get those, and then we'll open it up to everyone in the room after the panelists give the presentation. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Bing Liu. Bing is a building sector manager at Pacific Northwest National Lab. She's focused on emerging technologies, codes and standards, residential and commercial building, R&D and deployment. Bing has 27 years of experience in codes and standards and clean energy technology. She is currently serving on ASHRAE's Task Force for Building Decarbonization, and there she has led the efforts on the specific work group focused on building performance standards. Bing has been featured as one of the top 20 women in HVAC, and at the most recent ACEEE summer study, Bing was awarded a champion in energy efficiency, which is a very prestigious award. Bing and I gave a panel on building performance standards there, and so I've asked her to come back and give an encore presentation, and really to actually lean in and talk about how building performance standards intersect with energy code and building energy modeling specifically.
Thank you, Alex, for these extensive introductions. When Alex asked me to talk to CalBEM, I was like, no, I have not touched Energy Plus for 10 years. You know, when you move up to the management role, you're pretty much useless and replaceable. So that's why immediately I asked my colleague, and Mike Rosenberg said, are you going to be here? So I'm coming to talk to a bunch of the top niche experts about, you know, the building energy modeling and all this cool work you guys lead in the country to do. So, but when I was listening from Sanders, it was inspiring to me is, you know, there's actually two-way communications. So what I really want to talk about, not about modelings, et cetera. I really want to lay out what kind of the challenges and opportunities we're facing within this decade. We don't have all the solutions, but I'm really want you thinking about what you can provide to market, really helping us to move the existing building stocks. We care about existing building stock because if we're really working on towards to zero energy, zero carbon emissions by the year 2050, guess what? At least in the United States, 70% of that building stock, when we're talking about by the year 2050s, is the building we have today. So we really need to address the big elephant in the room. In the past, we've been very much focused on, at least as a part of our work to support U.S. Department of Energies, we found out it's most cost-effective or have a best return of investment if we focus our work on the energy codes, which is mostly for new constructions and the major renovations where we have a stake down there. In some part of the countries, it is a mandate. It's the worst building from energy performance point of view you can build, allowed to build in order to get your permit, right? But However, there's no challenges or there's no ways for us to really motivate on the deep energy retrofit for existing buildings. So I've been working on existing building retrofit for decades. I have to say we're not moving the needle at all because for the existing retrofit, there's just no motivations for building owners and decision makers to put efficiencies as one of top in terms of priority. Until recently, we finally see potential opportunity really change entire the game, something we call the building performance standards. I have to say we're not really leading the effort. It's really coming, a lot of them from the European countries and from other countries. What is the opportunity to us is we holding our buildings accountability and to set up their mandatory requirement for building in order to deliver what they're supposed to do to meet certain performance, either the energy or carbon. And more importantly, I want to lay out this opportunity for everyone is, with the recent legislations, we do actually also see the large amount of investment from federals coming to the state and local communities to both to support, to adopt the new energy codes, and also to establish the building performance standards. And I just want to call out, as a matter of the fact, where we have several cities in California made a commitment to establish a building performance standard policy by the Earth Day of 2024. And I really want to challenge California and to follow up with the Washington State and maybe set up a statewide building performance policy. It is important to have that policy in place because it's going to building up a large amount of market demand for us to looking at our existing building and find the most cost-effective way to deep retrofit our building. And if we have that large amount of market demand, the technologies, the services, audit, et cetera, all coming together and that help reduce the cost to do that as well. So quickly is like when we talk, one of the challenges we are working on to support the DOE led by Mike's team is now we quickly recognize, when we have a new construction building right after we turn into the permitted, right? And the new construction turn into existing building right away. So when we're doing the new construction buildings, right, we kind of follow the checklist to meet the code's requirement, but there's no guarantee your new construction buildings that deliver the performance, either energy or carbon, doesn't matter. There's actually no guarantee of that. Then your building immediately can be regulated on the building performance standard again. And if the new construction not meeting the particular target set by the building performance standards, it's a huge burden to the building owner and it's a huge backfire for us who's been working on the codes for decades. Is opponent of the codes can easily see that, guess what, code doesn't work, you're not delivering. So this is a really huge challenge in front of us in terms of when we're working on the policy and when we're working on the analysis, what is the interactions we can make sure our new construction and deliver. So this is another example is showing we also need to thinking about, during the whole compliance process, how we possibly streamlining between the new construction codes and the building performance standards as well. I was reminded I only have 1 minute on that. So it's just a teaser, again, in terms of giving a quick update of what's going on at the national stage. One thing I just want to point out is when we're working on both for the codes and the building performance standards, we really need thinking about from policy goal perspective, they should both contribute to your state and locality climate action plan. And when you're thinking about the metrics, they should be aligned because currently most of the energy codes is really focused on energy cost. And for the building performance, standards is you have to make sure you meet certain carbon goal or site energy goals. So it's actually currently most of those places is not aligned as well. And it's have a tremendous impact of what's your design choices, right? Related to, do you do the most of electrification now, or you do that later, right? And also, another thing, as I mentioned, is it's very important for us now really figure out if you do the modeling to predict performance-based codes, are we really deliver that outcome? Because most of our modeling work now is really model predicted for baseline comparison of your design, right? It's the modeling role is not to predict the utility bill outcome. We know how hard it is, including, there's a lot of uncertainties, but the market really call for that. Lastly is about the compliance, how we can make the streamlining compliance to move the buildings from design, from meet the code requirement, regulated to building performance standards, make that really streamlining through the whole lifetime of their buildings. And what's the role of building modeling? Again, I'm challenging everyone on the big question we're facing across the countries, and really looking for the working group discussions and bring your back practice for us to maybe carry to rest of the countries. Here is a few resources on here. I'm sure everyone has slides to take a look what we already have now, and we're looking for the discussions.
Thank you, Bing. Next, we have Matthew Dahlhausen with NREL. Matthew is a research engineer there. He works primarily on Comstock, which he's going to tell you all about, but it's a statistical model of the national commercial building stock. He's also very involved in Open Studio standards, a Ruby gem for automated model articulation with Open Studio and Energy Plus.
Cool, thank you. Hi, everyone. It's good to see so many familiar faces. I only regret there is only one dinner spot tonight. I can't do multiple dinners to have dinner with all of you. Okay, so let's talk about the why of building energy modeling. I think all of you know this. You know how energy modeling can be used for the benefit of building decarbonization, net zero, et cetera. This is a very familiar crowd, so I won't need to talk about that. But just have those ideas in mind. These are some of the things we want to be thinking about when we're using modeling. So the tools I want to talk about are Comstock and ResStock. These are tools we've developed at NREL. They are a statistical model of the national building stock. We take a bunch of characteristics, and it's sort of like a Monte Carlo process, if you're familiar with that, where we generate individual models, simulate all of them on our supercomputer, and then aggregate the results. It's funded by the Department of Energy. It's built on Energy Plus. And we have around 900,000 models that we're using to represent the diversity in the building stock of both commercial and residential buildings. So we did a significant validation project over the last 3 years called End-Use Load Profiles. We calibrated and validated the model against 2.3 million meters, both residential and commercial, for 11 different utilities around the country and all these different climate zones. We did this in phases, so we would focus on getting one area correct and then add another area that was maybe more focused on heating or cooling. All of that's captured in this report here. If you want to go find that on the project website. There's also the databases, so you can download all the individual models or aggregations of the results. It's calibrated to 2018 utility data, and all of the uncertainty that we have and estimates around that, we are more sure about the results for some building types in some regions than we are in others, and so all of those uncertainty metrics are captured in the report. We're currently working on a project called End-Use Saving Shapes, where we've taken our models, we run a bunch of measures or measure packages against them to capture the impact of efficiency and especially electrification. I'm going to share just some highlights from the residential version. Residential is about 3 to 6 months ahead of the commercial team on this. And there is a webinar online if you want to see the full results from this. You can capture that on the project website. Here are just some initial measure packages that the residential team worked on. They go from basic enclosure to electrifying heating to whole home electrification, and then whole home electrification with enclosure retrofits. And these are not meant to be recommendations. These are just to sort of show what space is possible with electrification and efficiency. Okay, so some initial results. I'm going to focus on just the 4 last ones here, which are the whole home electrification with or without different enclosure retrofits, because I think that's where everyone's super interested right now for building decarbonization. What we're looking at on the right is for Maryland. This is the total residential electricity consumption in Maryland for a typical February day. On the left side of the graph is the baseline, the right side are the measure packages, and then we have 7, 8, and 9 horizontally, which correspond to the ones marked in yellow here. And as you can see, the significant concern with electrification is that it's going to bump up the winter demand significantly. And we have to add a lot of capacity on the grid, which is hard to do because that's going to be a cold winter morning. Solar's not available, wind might not necessarily be there. How are we going to meet that? Is that going to be with storage or whatnot? If we do efficiency and we use efficient electric heating equipment, that impact can be quite minimized. And in the best cases, where we're looking at really good enclosure retrofits as well as really efficient heating equipment, we might actually see the load possibly go down. That's if all the buildings get that. So probably unlikely that that will happen, but that just shows the space of what is possible. I will note that we don't include the upper bound on the space, which would be every home just getting electric resistance heating, because we don't necessarily think that's very common. Yes. Yep, that is whole home electrification with minimal efficiency heat pumps. Right. So that's just typical, what was kind of typically being installed, and so we can expect an increase from that. But if we use high efficiency heat pumps, that's the second one, that's case. And that's no enclosure retrofits. So there's a significant difference there. One thing I really want to highlight is that there are significant differences in the impacts for individual homes. So what we're looking at here is electricity on the left, natural gas on the right, the savings distributions per home. So most homes save quite a bit. There are some homes that save quite a lot if they had electric resistance heating and now they're switching to heat pumps. And the point I want to make with this is that the project financials, whether it makes sense for an individual home, varies really significantly. It depends on the characteristics of the homeowner, how they set their thermostats, and whether a project is going to pay back or not matters quite a bit based on individual home characteristics. I don't have saving shapes results yet for commercial. I will in about 5 months or so. But I did want to highlight some of the distribution in the energy use in the commercial sector. So the blue here is what we're modeling with Comstock. The green is CBEX, which you're familiar with. And the yellow is the interval meter data that we got from utilities. You'll notice that there's some differences between the interval data and our our models and CBEX. And the reason for that is what's this building meter distinction. So utilities sell energy to meters, they don't sell it to buildings. And so there might be a building with multiple meters and we're missing some of them, which is what we think is happening here, or one meter that's serving multiple buildings and we have to disaggregate it out. That is a huge problem when you're trying to figure out how you allocate energy. And that was one of the main challenges with our project. So the 2 key things that I want you to keep in mind here is that, one, efficiency can have a significant impact in mitigating the grid capacity we need to install when we do electrification. Who pays for that is a huge question. Are we just going to put that in code, or is there going to be a market that's developed for that? The second is there is a wide distribution of energy use and savings for individual buildings. And so your incentive programs or anything you're developing around that really needs to take into that distribution into account. If you're just going to be using average prototypes, you're going to miss some nuance. So that's it. Yeah, oh, and if you want more, there's the project website.
Thank you, Matthew. A quick show of hands. Who knew about Comstock and Redstock? Okay, pretty good. And let's just do a quick shout out to our national labs, right? Like taxpayer money at work. We thought about making this entire panel national labs, but we thought it'd be good to have a practitioner on the ground, and we are very lucky to have Michael Adams from Glumac. He's a senior energy analyst, does all sorts of things on sustainable design, but he is working with clients that want to decarbonize their buildings, and he's going to tell us about what he does.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, excited to be here. Thanks, everybody. So I have some slides on pretty much who we're seeing in this space and who we're working with, a little bit about our approach and our process, one example project, and really diving in a little bit on the why we're doing it. So who are we seeing in this space? I work for Glumac. We're an MEP design engineering firm, but we have an energy group, about 25 people firm-wide. And really who we're seeing in this space are people that are being driven by public entity standards. A few images on the right, there's local building ordinances and requirements by local AHJs, so cities or states that are requiring different requirements on existing buildings of different sizes, really benchmarking those buildings, doing audits, understanding where your building is at, as well as portfolio standards, self-developed targets. So those are a lot of more private entities or corporations that are really self-driving, understanding where their portfolio is at, understanding what each individual asset is comprised of from an electrification or decarbonization standpoint, and really building out there. And lastly, we're seeing, really reduction goals for a lot of those corporate clients or even individual entities, so state-driven projects, local kind of government buildings or government sectors within different states, and a lot of our higher education campuses as well. Bottom right, City of Los Angeles and different cities across really the globe are starting to look at decarbonization plans for their city-owned facilities. And City of Los Angeles just recently, has asked for RFPs on decarbonizing their 1,700 municipality-owned buildings. A little bit about our process and how we approach this. Everybody knows, and we've talked about it a little bit here, there's a lot of data out there for a lot of these buildings. How do we use that data? How do we clean it? How do we manage it and put it in a way that we can actually make decisions on? So a lot of cleaning, a lot of BMS that's all over the place, right? Your different set points, you have uncalibrated things, and really a lot of climate data and a lot of just utility-based data, utility-level data. How do we compile that and really use it in a way to make informed decisions, give our clients real information that they could really make decarbonized plans for their assets and for their portfolio? So a lot of that in the middle, through that analytical side, advanced modeling. So putting this in a way that's, either Excel or Python or lots of other tools to really dive into that data and make informed decisions, really put it in a way where the data can interact with each other and you can actually use that data. And lastly, really putting that, packaging it up and allowing clients, owners, groups to make real decisions off of that data and putting it in ways that stakeholders can understand. So we found it very effective to use visual tools, interactive tools, and I have a slide later when I end off, but really making it so it's an enjoyable thing to look at rather than a 100-page format report that sits on somebody's desk and doesn't really drive any decision making, and really giving the keys to that ownership group or to that client so that they can make those decisions and having a living document that can evolve as their portfolio starts to decarbonize. One of the example projects I wanted to show here is a clean energy master plan we did for Cal State Long Beach. This was back in 2018. And really the CSU Chancellor's Office, all the CSU-wide, this is California State University's, has decarbonization goals for all of their campuses, all 23 campuses. Cal State Long Beach wanted to go above and beyond and set some more stringent targets, some closer deadlines than the CSU-wide deadlines. What did this look like? We looked at a lot of, obviously, their assets, their existing building stock, their planning for future buildings installation, as well as their fleet electrification, and pretty much was dialed in on Scope 1 and Scope 2 level emissions, so direct on-site gas usage as well as electricity usage on-site. And what did that look like? We worked with a couple other contractors that worked with more so the fleet electrification piece, but Glumac did about 28 level 1 energy audits. That was about 2.2 million square feet on campus. 9 level 2 energy audits, so that was more dialed in energy modeling, building calibrated models for those buildings, using that information on those calibrated models to inform the rest of the buildings that had similar program type. What this looked like for Cal State Long Beach, why did they care? They really wanted to understand their facilities planning and management program, really understand how can they plan to decarbonize their buildings, how can they plan to decarbonize their central plant, using their funding sources, which for a university are different than a lot of other entities, and how could they push their savings every year that they get from different installations and different incorporations and roll that into other improvements, whether it's through CapEx or OpEx programming through their facilities planning and management. They also wanted to understand how does their buildings and their overall usage profile can match with their renewable portfolio standards. They're based in SoCal Edison. They have curtailment issues with their solar PV. How can they plan ahead in terms of their renewable portfolio for both solar PV as well as battery storage? They have a district plant that is not electrified. How can they really understand their approach to electrifying that central plant by first understanding each asset that's connected to that central plant? And lastly, how they interact with SoCal Edison. How could they work within the grid, work to not curtail their solar, and really move forward in that aspect. Kind of went over this a little bit, but the reasons why, right? Outside of Cal State Long Beach, why are owners interested in doing this? Really understanding where in the building your energy is being used. That's just a general pie chart. Everybody's seen it for a generic building profile and end use, and probably a lot of that data is really aligned with what Matt's work is for the end use profiling. But understanding where in the building your energy is being used, so you can identify where are the big pieces of the pie, and focusing on those, especially as it relates to electrification for space heating and domestic hot water heating systems. Identifying which improvements are most impactful, whether that's from kind of a capital infrastructure cost, operations and maintenance costs. It can be sequence of operations and controls upgrades, or really just sensor calibration and understanding so your BMS actually operates in a way that's conducive to your building and your usage. And lastly, developing a plan of how to bring those improvements into the building, and again, roll those savings in from low-hanging fruit to really saving up capital so you can do some of those bigger capital projects that take a lot of that money. Reason 2, really looking beyond that building footprint. This is really representative or relevant for campus-based entities, portfolio-based entities that have some of these bigger targets and bigger requirements. Understanding what each individual building or asset is utilizing from especially a district standpoint can help you electrify those central plants. Those are probably one of the bigger items that really need to be resolved. Both district city plants as well as campus level plants that have large steam or fossil fuel based infrastructure for those heating and domestic hot water needs. Understanding how thermal storage can play a role in that, either on the heating side or the chilled water side, and electrification of those items. Grid harmonization, so looking at how entities can react to demand response program, demand response profiles, as well as shifting load using battery storage technology or other avenues through smart building. And lastly, distributed energy resources. So how does solar PV, battery storage, different thermal energy storage, as well as other types of renewable energy play a role overall in decarbonizing your portfolio? And last slide, just talked about this, actually talked to Greg a little bit earlier, but how do we make this a usable, enjoyable document for clients to use that's a living document that can evolve as their portfolio is decarbonized? We don't want a 100-page report sitting on somebody's desk, not really influencing anybody. not helping any decision-making. We really want to make interactive tools that are usable by all stakeholders to really understand how these impacts can weigh and overall impact their portfolio and campus. That's all from me. I'll bring it back to Alex.
All right, thank you all. So now we're going to shift into Q&A. Elise, you're still going to relay some questions from online, but first let's start with any questions in the audience. Who's going to be the brave soul to ask the first question? Ted. Carrie here will be walking around with the microphone. So let's...
This question is for you. If you're in charge of the world, what's the top 3 things you do on existing buildings and code for the next code cycle?
I feel so empowered coming to Sacramento. I'm a mechanical engineer by training. My dream is to work hard out of job. So every time, one thing I want to mention is we're talking about electrifications and the heat pumps, right? And we have $9 billion available for heat pumps used across the country. That's part of the Inflation Reduction Act has been passed this year, right? It's actually gave me a nightmare. The nightmare is if we don't do that right, we're really screwed up. The screw up part can be so many, in many ways. Example is, it is not right to do one-to-one replacement of your furnaces with the heat pumps, or with your fossil fuel boilers with the heat pumps. Doesn't matter residential and commercial buildings. It was so darn cheap. If you triple, double size of your boilers, right? It doesn't matter in terms of the cost, because I did 10 years design as mechanical engineering commercial buildings. We just don't want to call back. We want safety. We add so much safety on our heatings. So if you do that one-on-one sizing replacement from boiler to heat pumps, we really waste a lot of capital cost, and we also not really performs, at the peak, the peak performance of the heat pumps. So how we really change our entire professionals to understand what is the right size when you get into the retrofit of existing business, what is the right size? Educate ourselves and building the confidence to the decision maker, like building owners. That's actually a pretty big deal, which is, I think, as a part of the task force working for ASHRAEs, we're trying to building a really more very intense trainings to train ourselves as professionals, how to do that. So that's maybe the largest kind of concerns I have down here. The second one, I think mostly about we really need to change our message and language. So we're energy efficiency pro people, we're modeling peoples, but the decision and the financial makers, they're not looking for that. What they're looking for the built environment. They're looking for resilience, they're looking for comfort, they're looking for the asset, right? We have to change our value propositions to make ourselves more relevant in the big decision financial making conversation and discussion. So I really like Michael's idea is get rid of the 100 pages of the report. Make that dialable dashboard for non-engineer and who are the decision makers to find that relevant, take actionable relevant from our analysis result. I'll only give you 2, and happy hour give you the other 2.
All right, stick around for happy hour. We have an online question, and Elise is going to relay that.
No longer Elise, I am the avatar of the chat. So we have a question from Eric Kolderup, actually. Also, I can't tell if this mic is on. It is? Okay, great. So, oh, Well, thanks for being on the forum, Eric. Okay, I just want to be someone's avatar.
Eric has cloned himself.
Well, speaking for Eric, as we all know, I am super unqualified to do. This is a question for Michael Adams, but also for the rest of the panel, if they'd like to chime in. Any suggestions for how we can improve education and training of energy modelers, specifically for these applications in existing buildings? Do you see any gaps or important skills or knowledge?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Yeah, education in the energy modeling space is challenging and definitely something that, to my experience, everything has been learned pretty much on the ground in consulting. Very little in terms of higher education or classes or coursework before really gives you the tools you need to succeed, especially with a lot of the more complex dialed-in energy modeling softwares and capabilities to navigate those things. So what could help that? I think that there's different organizations that support that. At VIPSA, there's some California-based organizations that there's a lot of knowledge sharing and knowledge transfer. I think CalBEM is a really good kind of opportunity in place where those things are shared. You know, especially some of the state-specific compliance software, they have forums and FAQs that support. But in terms of great resources for learning outside of really just hitting the ground and modeling and figuring things out kind of really from an analytical standpoint, I don't know if I have a great answer for that.
I guess the question is kind of like, what more do we need beyond what exists now, too, if you have thoughts. But that's an open question for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the place with all the people in the room that we answer that question and figure out what works, at least best. You know, forums, really people getting together and understanding a lot of these different tools utilize a lot of different approaches and metrics and engines and different solutions. So really getting everybody on the same page of how to approach those problems and issues. And really understanding what's the long-term, what's the solution we're looking for, how do we get there, and is everybody on the same page? If not, what can we learn from each other and kind of, you know, consolidate and work through that.
Great, thank you.
Oh, we have a add-on.
Oh, want to add on to that?
Yeah, I'd just say one thing that I would highly recommend for modelers, and I would like to see in the education, is diagnosing and fixing serious HVAC problems in existing buildings.
I actually want to adding on there. I actually been modeler when I was mechanical engineer. As early as when EQuest was still crashing, so back in the 1990s, then transfer energy plus, etc. So I think in terms of education, in addition to grow our next generation of analysts and modelers and fully understand using modeling as a design from the beginning as a design assistant tools, right, not to after fact of construction. Another thing is really to outreach to utilities, architecture, and other non-modeling world to help them to understand, you know, what is the purpose of the modeling, and also what is the uncertainty. What we found out when we have a large modeling group, people will train the young people down there, is there's always like a modeling predicts something, right, that your 5% off, your 10% off is backlash there. What's the purpose of modeling? But we should change that to think about it. We had looking at the maybe just like more like, you know, learn from the insurance companies, right? What is a certain level? What is really the purpose of the modeling? There's a lot of educations. We need to really go out to other key stakeholders to understand that.
Great, we'll do an audience question. And for the benefit of folks virtual, could you just announce your name?
Hi, this is Dimitri Contianis. I want to kind of add on to the educating BEM practitioners. Eric and I have been working on this tool called BEM Cyclopedia, which is like Wikipedia for energy modeling. If you're interested in that, I'll be giving a quick spiel during Working Group 2 later this morning. But the idea is it's an opportunity for people to share their knowledge with the greater community in a sort of crowdsourced manner. So more to follow on that. But the second thing is I actually have a question for Matt about the end use survey that you did, particularly the load shapes, et cetera. So we as BEM practitioners have been relying on very old schedule data from ASHRAE user manuals, schedules that were developed probably 20 plus years ago, maybe more. How different were the load shapes that you found in your analysis? And is that data in a format where we can update our very old assumptions that we've been using for the basis of early stage models and compliance models? We kind of use the same schedules for everything until you get to the detailed design. So do you have better data, and can we use it, and should we use it?
Sure. Yeah, it really depends on which kind of schedules in which buildings. So there's a lot of nuance in that. I think one thing we found is a lot of the prototype schedules assumed lunch dips for a lot of different things, and that just doesn't really happen all that much in existing buildings. We captured a lot of schedule variability as far as starting and stopping of the building and the magnitude of how much lighting or plug loads vary. And that distribution information is incredibly important. So I would say the biggest change is that we have a significant distribution of, and we have the criteria for that. And if you want to take your model and actually create a distribution of possible schedules in a building, and I think that's just the biggest change that I would recommend people use instead of picking one specific schedule from a user manual. I don't think that's a great approach.
Okay, we're going to do one more quick question, and we'll take it online. Apologies for folks that can't get questions. If you are in person, track these folks down during break. If you have questions online that we haven't gotten to, we'll do our best to relay those to the panelists, and hopefully they can get back to you.
You can also post them on the forum to increase your chances of getting seen during breaks. I'm now the avatar of Russ King. There have been a lot of great advancements related to computer modeling. What new technological advancements have happened for getting an existing building into the model? Some existing buildings don't even have architectural plans, so field data collection can be a real challenge. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll start it. So yes, there, especially with a lot of these campuses, right? Sometimes we just have a campus electricity meter, and we don't even have chilled water, heating, hot water, steam that goes into the building. So wide variety in the quality of data that we're getting for a lot of the buildings that we need to model. And a lot of that's based on what we can assume that the building's utilizing through a site walk. So existing building conditions, looking at BMS profiles, how the building's scheduled and operated, if everything's in hand, operated manually, or if things are actually operating to some sort of schedule. Really developing that profile of the building is extremely challenging, and that is extremely important for understanding how your energy efficiency measures or your conservation measures are actually going to impact the building in its lifetime. So developing that utilizes a lot of different approaches, past project experiences, other data that we have, end use profile modeling, because it needs to be based on something, and where you can point where that basis is from is really important for that calibration effort and really making sure that you're recommending things that are going to improve the building from an efficiency standpoint. In terms of technologies that do it, a lot of it's energy modeling and theoretical based, but really kind of going into the building and seeing how those systems operate, interviewing that facilities manager, whoever's operating that building, interviewing occupants, seeing how people are comfortable, what's going on in that building is extremely important for understanding actually, where that energy is being used. And more often than not, understanding, if you go into an old building, understanding the problems and issues, sometimes you'll probably need to increase your energy usage to at least address the occupant comfort and what that building's actually used for.
I'm going to add in something very quickly in terms of available resources down here. We actually have long-standing developed tools is really focused on existing building audit and retrofit solutions. It's called Audit Template. It's funded by DOE, and it's a free tool for anybody to use. It's mostly based on the ASHRAE level 2 audit information, and also based on the data you collected, give you the recommendation what cost-effective retrofit package may look like for your individual building. So it's all free. It's called Audit Template. More importantly, we are expanding that to looking at if the building's goal is not only energy efficiency reduction, is also decarbonization. We are adding the feature, if you select your goal is to do the building decarbonization planning purpose, and because the recommendation features could be very different coming out of the package. So this is a new work we just adding to this audit template tool. Another thing, we also, by working to support a state and local has the existing building performance standards requirement required to have audit, we're also thinking doing the light audit. Actually, level 2 is very comprehensive, time resource intense. So that's maybe why Michael's project only doing 9 projects for level 2 and 28 on level 1. So we're working on with actually standard 211s to develop called maybe a little bit called decarbonized light audit. So we do 80-20. If maybe we significantly reduce amount of on-site audit effort, but capture all the most major impactful audit informations for the decarbonization purpose. So that's another work is ongoing now.
Great, thank you. Well, this was an exciting panel. They queued up a lot of issues that hopefully will be continued to be discussed during the working groups, we're going to take a break right now. It'll end up being about a 10-minute break. So at 10 a.m., we're going to reconvene to start the 3 different working groups. As Elise mentioned, we'll have 2 in here and another one around the corner. Thank you all. Please join me in thanking our panelists one more time.